The air on Cedar Island no longer smelled of pine and fresh water. It smelled of sawdust, fresh paint, and something far more acrid, the smug certainty of Karen Hightower. From the wide windows of my grandfather's old cedar shingle cabin, I watched the final touches being applied to Lakeshore Haven Cabins, Phase 1 complete. A garish sign, carved from distressed barnwood that had never seen a barn, announced it to the world. 30 identical rustic chic cabins, each with a twee name like Loon's Nest or Whispering Pine, now formed a perfect, soulless semicircle along the pristine western shore of my island. My island. Not legally, perhaps, in the modern paper-bound sense. Not yet. But in every way that mattered, in the way my bones knew the contour of every granite outcrop, in the way my father had taught me the secret blueberry patches, in the way my grandfather's ashes were mingled with the soil beneath the oldest white pine, Cedar Island was mine. Our family had been its quiet stewards for 5 generations, since Ezekiel Reed won the 400-acre island in a high-stakes poker game in 1898. The deed, a peculiar handwritten document, had been lost to a courthouse fire in the 1930s. Our claim since then was one of continuous, peaceful occupation. A fact the local government, with a wink and a handshake, had always accepted. Taxes were paid on the mainland house. The island was our private Eden. That changed when the Hightowers bought the old Henderson place on the mainland shore opposite the island. Karen Hightower, a woman whose blonde bob was as sharp as her temperament, immediately saw not an island of wild beauty, but undeveloped waterfront potential. She'd arrived at my door, a hurricane of leopard print athleisure and jangling bangles, with a win-win proposition. That island is just sitting there going to waste, she chirped, her eyes already calculating board feet of lumber. We could build a destination. Think of the community value. I've already run the preliminary numbers. I'd refused, politely at first, then with granite finality. The island wasn't for sale, not for development, not for her. Her smile had tightened, her eyes glinting with the cold light of a challenge unmet. Well, we'll see about that, dear. Property like that shouldn't be hoarded. There are laws. I'd underestimated her. Karen Hightower wasn't just a pushy suburbanite. She was a former municipal clerk from a big city, with a lawyer for a husband and a Rolodex of favors. She discovered the cloud on the title, the lost deed. She then launched a blitzkrieg of legal and bureaucratic maneuvering. She petitioned the county, arguing the island was effectively abandoned, its ownership unclear. She produced historical surveys that suggested a pre-1900 parcel division no one had ever heard of. She hosted barbecues for planning committee members. She talked and lobbied and charmed and threatened. And while Eli Reed, a quiet historian who preferred archives to arguments, was still consulting with a bemused and elderly lawyer in the county seat, Karen struck. With shocking speed, she obtained a complex web of permits: lakeshore development permits, zoning variances, environmental waivers. Her lawyers argued adverse possession, easement by necessity, and a dozen other doctrines that boiled down to one thing: momentum. By the time my lawyer had finished sputtering about precedents and injunctions, the first bulldozers were already rumbling off the barges. I stood on the shore that first day of destruction, my heart a cold stone in my chest. Ancient firs, their trunks wider than my embrace, groaned and fell with a sound that echoed across the water like a dying god's sigh. The earth was torn open, the quiet shattered by the scream of machinery. Karen oversaw it all from a pontoon boat, sipping iced tea through a metal straw, pointing with imperious jabs of her finger. My initial fury was volcanic, all-consuming. I wanted to scream, to burn the machinery, to stand in front of the bulldozers. But as I watched, a strange, glacial calm settled over me. Rage was hot, and hot things burned out quickly. What was needed was cold. Cold as the deep water at the island's center. Cold as a stone axe. My grandfather's words, spoken to me as a boy when a rival fisherman tried to steal our secret spot, came back. Son, a man who throws the first punch is a man who's already run out of ideas. The real power is in knowing the punch is coming, and having the floor already greased beneath his feet. I stopped protesting. I stopped returning my lawyer's increasingly frantic calls. To the outside world, especially to the triumphant Karen, I had surrendered. I became a ghost on my own land. I would sit on my cabin's porch, a silent, brooding sentinel watching the invasion. Karen took it as capitulation. She'd wave, a magnanimous victor. Don't you worry, Eli. There'll always be a spot for you at the Friday fish fry. You can be our local color. Her crew would snicker. But my eyes weren't glazed with defeat. They were recording. I noted everything. The exact locations of the cabins. The routing of electrical lines that were, according to my grandfather's stories, suspiciously close to submerged Anishinaabe burial mounds marked on no modern map. I watched as they diverted, a seasonal stream, violating their own environmental plan. I used my skills as a historian not to fight the present, but to excavate the past. I stopped sleeping. I lived on coffee and a silent, humming purpose. The key was not the island's recent history, but its distant one. And not just any history. I began a deep, obsessive dive into records no one had touched for a century. The dusty attic of the County Historical Society yielded my first clue. A ledger from the 1920s noting a federal survey of Cedar Island, citing a case number that seemed to belong to the Bureau of Indian Affairs. It was a stray thread, but I pulled. I drove to the state archives 3 hours away. Days blurred into nights in microfilm rooms. I found it in a brittle carbon copy memorandum from 1934, from the Department of the Interior to the U.S. Attorney's Office. It concerned unresolved trust land issues, Region 9. Listed among several properties was Cedar Island, approximate 400 acres, Lake Serene. Status: title clouded per Lumbee and Catawba claims 1891. Federal interest remains pending final settlement. Jurisdiction: FBI, DIV of Land Fraud and Federal Trust Enforcement. My blood sang a silent, icy song. Federal interest. FBI jurisdiction. The 1891 reference was the poker game. Ezekiel Reed had won the island from a timber baron named Thaddeus Gage. But what if Gage never truly had clear title to bet? What if the land was still, in the eyes of the federal government, entangled in unresolved Native American land claims? The lost deed wasn't just a family tragedy, it was a smokescreen for a dormant federal case. Karen Hightower was building not on disputed county land, but on land that potentially belonged to a federal trust. And every permit she'd hustled, every bribe she'd likely slipped, every environmental rule she'd browbeaten into a waiver, was now not just a local violation, but a potential federal crime. Conspiracy to defraud the United States, wire fraud for the electronic transfer of permit fees and construction loans, and most seriously violation of the Indian Land Rights Act. But a 70-year-old memo wasn't enough. I needed the source. I needed the 1891 claim. I went nuclear. I booked a flight to Washington, D.C., and spent a week in the labyrinthine depths of the National Archives. I was a man possessed, my fingers blackened with old ink, my eyes straining at faded cursive. Finally, in a box marked pre-1900 land claims, Lake Serene Basin, I found them. The original petition from representatives of the Lumbee and Catawba nations, disputing Thaddeus Gage's purchase from a corrupt Indian agent. And crucially, the subsequent filing from the U.S. Attorney, placing a lease pendens, a notice of pending legal action, on the title, freezing its status until adjudication. The case was never adjudicated. It was simply forgotten, lost in the shuffle of history but never formally closed. The lease pendens was the ticking bomb. And Karen Hightower had built 30 cabins on top of it. I didn't go to the local police. I didn't go back to my lawyer. I went to the nearest field office of the FBI. I walked in with a carefully constructed dossier, the 1891 claim, the 1934 Justice Department memo, photographs of the construction, copies of Karen's permits with my annotations highlighting the violated federal statutes, Clean Water Act violations for the stream, potential Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act issues. I presented it not as a disgruntled landowner, but as a concerned historian and citizen uncovering what appeared to be a massive, ongoing federal land fraud. The agent who took my file, a serious man in his 50s named Grayson, was initially skeptical. But as he flipped through the century-old documents, then the glossy photos of the brand-new cabins, his expression changed. The scale of it, the brazen construction on land with a dormant federal claim, was audacious. "And you say she obtained these permits through local channels, knowing the title was disputed?" he asked. "She actively used the lack of a modern deed as her justification," I said calmly. "She argued abandonment. She never disclosed, and likely never investigated, the pre-existing federal claim. She fraudulently obtained permits for land she had no clear right to develop, using interstate banking and communications to fund it. She's not just building cabins, Agent Grayson. She's selling them. Pre-construction purchases, via her website. Buyers from 3 different states so far. That was the hook. Interstate commerce. Wire fraud. A pattern of racketeering. The FBI's interest shifted from academic to intensely operational. The next month was a masterpiece of silent theater. Undercover agents posing as a wealthy couple from Chicago toured the development, recording Karen's spiel about clear title secured and ironclad investments. Forensic accountants began tracing the flow of money from buyers to Karen's LLC, to the construction company owned by her brother-in-law. A historical anthropologist from the Department of the Interior confirmed the potential presence of protected cultural sites near the construction zone. I continued to play my part, the defeated, eccentric island hermit. I'd wave blankly at Karen's pontoon boat. She'd shout encouragements about turning the page and progress. All the while, the federal net was closing around her, woven from the very threads of history she had been too arrogant to notice. The reckoning arrived not with a whisper, but at dawn on a Saturday in peak summer. The Lakeshore Haven grand opening was scheduled for noon. Karen's crew was hanging bunting. A giant ribbon was stretched across the entrance to the cabin circle. Just as the sun broke over the pines, the lake's surface, usually still at that hour, churned. Not with pleasure boats, but with a flotilla of official vessels. 2 large FBI patrol boats, a Department of the Interior craft and 3 county sheriff launches. They disgorged a small army of agents in tactical vests marked FBI, DOI and EPA. Karen, dressed in a bright white pantsuit for her big day, stood frozen, a clipboard dangling from her hand, her mouth a perfect O of shock. The scene unfolded with brutal, clinical efficiency. Agent Grayson walked up to her, flanked by 2 other agents. Karen Hightower? FBI. We have a warrant for your arrest on multiple federal counts, including conspiracy to commit wire fraud, making false statements to government agencies, and violation of the Indian Land Rights Act. The words hung in the dewy air. Her husband, a florid-faced man shouting about lawyers, was also cuffed. The construction foreman was detained. Agents fanned out, securing every cabin, posting bright orange notices on every door, seized U.S. government. The ribbon was cut, not by Karen with golden scissors, but by an agent with a knife who let it fall to the mud. I watched it all from my porch, a cup of coffee in my hand. I took a slow sip as I saw Karen's eyes, wide with dawning, horrific understanding, scan the chaos and finally land on me. The silent man on the hill. The man she thought she'd beaten. Our gazes locked across the distance. In her eyes, I saw the furious, scrambling collapse of her entire world. The money, the status, the smug victory. In mine, she would have seen nothing but the calm, deep water of the lake. I gave no smile, no nod of triumph. I simply watched. Agent Grayson broke her stare, leading her away. As they put her in a boat, she twisted, her voice finally finding itself, shrieking across the water. This is my land. I have permits. Reed. You did this. You. The sound was swallowed by the growl of the engines. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was total. The federal government, having reasserted its interest, initiated formal proceedings. Karen's assets were frozen. The heartbroken buyers sued her. The local planning board was dissolved in scandal. The cabins, technically now federal property pending the ultimate resolution of the 1891 claim, stood empty and silent. A team of federal archaeologists arrived, and with my quiet guidance confirmed the sacred sites. The stream was restored. The orange seized signs were a permanent, glaring feature. One afternoon, Agent Grayson came to see me at my cabin. The legal process, he explained, would be long. The ultimate disposition of the island would involve negotiations with the Lumbee and Catawba nations, the Department of Justice and myself. But the criminal case was rock solid. Karen was looking at decades in prison. You played a long game, Mr. Reed, he said, accepting a cup of coffee. I just remembered what my grandfather taught me, I said, looking out at the silent, empty cabins. Don't throw the first punch. Just make sure the last one is yours. He followed my gaze. What will you do with them? The cabins, I mean. If they end up reverting to you. I thought about it. The idea had come to me in the silent watches of the night. They're well built, I said. A shame to waste them. I think I'll donate them. Have them disassembled, log by log, and transported. The Anishinaabe community up north could use a new cultural center and youth lodge. The Lumbee and Catawba representatives mentioned a need for housing for elders. Seems fitting. They were built on stolen land with stolen money. Let them be used for healing. Grayson nodded slowly, a rare smile touching his lips. Poetic justice. No, I said, the first hint of warmth finally returning to my voice as I looked at the land beginning to heal. Just justice. That evening I walked down to the shore. The neon Lakeshore Havens sign had been taken down. The bunting was gone. The only sounds were the lapping of water, the cry of a loon, and the wind in the pines, sounds that had been there for centuries before Karen Hightower, and would be there long after. The island was wounded, but it was quiet again. It was once more listening to its own heart. And so was I. The final act was mine. Not with a bulldozer but with a donation. Not with a shout, but with the quiet, irrevocable turn of a page. Karen Hightower had tried to build an empire on my island. She'd merely built her own prison, and furnished the means for others to find a home. And I, the silent man who waited, had simply held the key to the cell door all along. The FBI were just the delivery men for a reckoning written over a century ago, in ink that never truly faded.